Record real quick. Okay. Hello, welcome, Connor Newcomb, host of the Locked On Orioles podcast. First off, this is a very big Orioles season. I mean, I'm 18. I do not remember an Orioles team being this good. I remember Matt Wieters, Adam Jones, and JJ Hardy, and that being like really that team. But I don't remember really feeling like we have any semblance of a shot to win anything. This season kind of feels a lot different. How does this make you feel?
Yeah, I mean, this team could honestly more than could. They probably should win 100 games, right? I think they have
Yeah.
to go. I think it's 6-6 to win 100 games down the stretch. I mean, they'll probably do better than 6-6 down the stretch. Every single team in Orioles history that has won 100 games has at least reached the World Series,
Yeah.
which is kind of wild to think about. Like that doesn't guarantee that they're going to go to the World Series, but you're right. Like the JJ Hardy, Manny Machado, Adam Jones, Matt Wieters teams of the Buck Showalter era, like they had a couple of really good teams. 2012, they go to the playoffs. 2014, they win 96 games. They win the AL East. Like they were some really good baseball teams. They were not as complete as these Orioles seem to be. And I still don't know if I feel like, this Orioles team is like, the best team in the American League. They can win the World Series. The Braves are so good, it seems like they're cheating. And, despite the Orioles' crazy win over the Astros on Monday night, like that Astros team is really good. The Dodgers are really good. So I don't know if they're quite to that point yet where it feels like we can go win a World Series. But I mean, the turnaround's been unbelievable. And this team's been so fun to watch, to cover. They're going to win 100 games. I mean, who would have thought that could have happened? That's how good this team's been.
Yeah, for talking about the World Series, it's kind of weird for me because I read all the metrics and it's like 15th, 15th, 15th and everything. And you don't think that's like a real like World Series contending team when you see the Braves who have like what feels like 1,000 more home runs than any other team in the league right now. But everybody on the team from Adley Rutschmanson to Ramon Urias, it just everybody sound like is at least decent and is every day playable, so there's no real weak spots. Well, this is kind of like a shorter question. What was your favorite player growing up, whether like whoever it may be?
Yeah, my favorite Oriole, I mean, my first favorite Oriole was BJ Surhoff. It was his second stint with the Orioles in the early 2000s when I kind of first started getting into the O's, getting into baseball. But it's hard to say that's my favorite because those teams were so bad that it's like, yeah, I loved BJ Surhoff and I loved Melvin Mora and I loved Miguel Tejada, but like they were good. The teams they were on were terrible. So in the combination of good team, good player, it's got to be Adam Jones. And I know that's a pretty standard answer for a lot of Orioles fans for that era is Adam Jones. But, that Orioles team in 2012, led by Adam Jones, that went to the postseason for the first time in 15 years, that was the first time in my life I had seen even a winning baseball team, let alone a playoff team. And Adam Jones was right in the middle of that. And seeing what he got to do Friday night, come back, get retired as an Oriole was so, so cool. And I just think like, these guys like Adley and Gunnar like could get up to that, Adam Jones status in Baltimore at some point, but he's up there alone.
Yeah. Um, Kind of transitioning more, the current team right now is so very young. And this is kind of more of a sad note. But do you have is this on your mind that have to re-sign all these people? Or because I'm really just trying to enjoy this season, enjoy next season, enjoy the season after that, and then maybe start to panic that we haven't re-signed Adley or re-signed Gunner or re-signed Jackson Holiday whenever he gets brought up. But is that something you're concerned about or not really?
It's on my mind. I think like you, I try not to let it creep in too much because again, like even these guys who are the free agents the soonest is really just Anthony Santander, who will be a free agent after next season. So the guy who's played a big part of your team and is the free agent the soonest, you still have one more year of. And then, the year after that, you have Cedric Mullins hitting free agency and Austin Hayes shortly after that. And then after those guys, you have this current wave of prospects like Adley and Gunner who will hit free agency down the line. Now, the thing that makes me worry is not so much, the fact that they just have so many of them. Any team with this many young stars just would not be able to pay all of them. It's really tough to do so. They have a lot of good players. What worries me is the John Angelos part of it. He's basically come out and said, we're not going to pay all these guys. And the fact that he's saying that to the media makes you
Yeah.
think that behind closed doors, they're planning on paying even less of them than they're talking about publicly. And so for me, it's like, if they do get a deal done with an Adley Rutschman, with a Gunnar Henderson, I'm almost scared that that's going to be the only one they do. Like they're going to throw the money there, which they need to. I mean, those guys could be Hall of Famers. It's early in their careers, but they're on that
Yeah.
trajectory so far. But I'm scared that they do that one deal and they say, all right, we spent our money. Look, we locked up our young stars. And, say it is Gunnar, and then Adley walks and Westberg walks, Kerstad walks, Kauser walks, and all these guys continue to hit free agency. And you can say, yeah, Mike Elias and his team can continue churning out these guys. But it's harder to do it when you're not picking in the top 5 in the draft. It's just harder. You don't get access to as many good players. It's harder to do. You're not going to find another time where you get Adley Rutschman and Gunnar Henderson in the first 2 picks of a draft. That may never happen again. So I'm very much enjoying the ride, but in the back of my mind, it is a little bit concerning.
Yeah, it is very, because we also have holiday coming up, and well, I trust that we will be able to. I like Westberg a lot. I don't know why he didn't play as much. I like him a lot, but I understand he's probably not going to be in a lifelong Oriole. And I have faith that we can get another player to take his position. But I would rather have the players I like, the players that just seeing the video of everybody celebrating the playoff clinch, just that the team all the videos you see by the team is everybody having fun. It looks just like such a great clubhouse environment. So that's really my main concern. You spoke on it a little bit, but can you just in 3 to 5 words, can you express your feelings on John Angelos?
I don't like him and I don't trust him. That's more than 3 to 5 words, but that's where it is.
Yeah. Slightly switching subjects. How, so you've mentioned on your podcast, on these West Coast trips, it's rough to do the podcast and so you end up doing mailbags and end up doing whatever not. But how is it working a normal job, 9 to 5, and doing a baseball podcast? And often I'll wake up and the game finished at midnight, and I see Locked On Orioles posted at like midnight, and it seems almost instantaneous. What is it like working a normal job along with the podcast?
Yeah, I've talked about it a little bit on the pod, but it's mostly like what you brought up. I only bring it up when there is West Coast games during the week. Those get me. Like, as you
Yeah,
said, I'll do a mailbag. I'll hit on some other points, maybe do like a prospect episode, just because if it's a 10 p.m. start, right? You got a game that ends, if you're lucky, at 12:30, usually closer to 1. And then my process takes at least an hour after the game ends. It's about 30 minutes of recording, 30 minutes of editing and posting time, essentially. So you're looking at 1:30 to 2. My alarm is 6:30, 6:45 to get up for work in the morning.
yeah,
That's not a great combination. So yeah, I'm actually coming up here on just about a year of doing this with a 9 to 5 job. It was kind of I was a freelance broadcaster for a while after graduating from the University of Maryland in 2019. And so last September was kind of the first time I took a 9 to 5 job, outside of sports broadcasting. And it was kind of easier because it was right at the end of last season. The Orioles were still in it, but they had kind of been
yeah,
out of it by the last week of the year. So I didn't really have to, for the first, I don't know, 6 months of my job, have to deal with it. And then March got here and April got here, and it really started to ramp up. So the West Coast is hard. Otherwise, like, take here Tuesday night, right? The Orioles have an 8 o'clock game in Houston. That's a little tougher. 7 o'clock is much
yeah,
easier, but I'll be up because, 8 o'clock to 10:30 or 11 isn't terrible. Now I'm in bed at midnight, probably getting up at, maybe I push my alarm a little bit on those days, a little bit later in the morning.
yeah,
And then honestly, what helps me a lot, and even on days when the Orioles play like a 6:30 home game, right, that ends at 9 o'clock,
yeah,
and I'm done podcasting by 10, I wouldn't be in bed before 10 anyway, like on an off day. What I
yeah,
do utilize a lot, I am a really big time nap person, and I'm not like a 2 to 3 hour nap person. I'm one of those people who like has perfected like the 15-minute nap when you get home from
uh,
work that like recharges you and doesn't let you get into like the deep sleep. That's
Yeah.
huge for me, especially when they're playing these like 8 o'clock games where it's like it's not too late where I skip the podcast, but like I'm
Yeah.
up a little late. So that's a little looking inside of it. It's, it's tough because I love doing this podcast. I mean, I will tell you right now, I get more enjoyment out of the podcast than I do on a kind of basic day at my 9 to 5 job. But one pays the bills more than the other one does. So it's
Yeah.
certainly a balance. But I try to give people the episodes as much as I can. And I thought about giving it up at this time last year, but the fact that the Orioles were kind of turning the corner made me not do it. If the O's had lost 90 games last season and I got a 9 to 5 job last September, I probably would have given up the podcast. But the fact that I saw that corner turning and I'm like, this is going to be well worth it. And this season it really paid off.
Yeah. Yeah. You kind of touched on it, but the podcast, I don't know how many moments come out of it, but like I assume some good moments have come out of doing the podcast. What is your favorite moment, whether it's with fans, interactions, or at like the stadium, or like how you felt like after like a really big win? What was your favorite moment to come out of you doing the podcast?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to sound a little like it's going to my head a little bit. Maybe it is, but I've been to now 16 games this season, and there's only been one or two where someone hasn't come up to me at the stadium and said something,
Yeah.
said hello, wanted to talk about the pod, whether it's someone maybe DMs me on Twitter or an Instagram and says, "Hey, I'm here. I saw you're at the game. Can I come say hi?" Or I feel like even the cooler ones is like one day I was in the team store with my friends. We were at trying to think what game it was. It might have been the game where they debuted the City Connect uniforms earlier this year. And it was in the
Yeah.
team store because I wanted to buy one of the hats. And like three different people stopped me in the team store. Or specifically after I did really my big John Angelos episode,
Yeah.
after he was just continuously just saying stupid things. And I really did a full episode that was just like, this is how he's kind of hurting this team, this organization. And having multiple people like reach out to me and I don't want to like get anybody in trouble and divulge whose names it was, but it wasn't just like fans and regular listeners of the podcast. Like it was somewhat more than that. People that I didn't think listened to the show reaching out and being like, great episode, thanks for saying some of that stuff that some people don't feel comfortable talking about or
Yeah.
don't want to say about John Angelos. So that's been cool, but otherwise it's really cool to have an outlet. I among my close group of friends, not a lot of them are big Orioles fans, and even the ones that are Orioles fans are not as rabid as fans as I am. So I don't have the super huge outlet after a game sometimes to text 50 people like I would more so with the Ravens because just more people are bigger
Yeah.
Ravens fans. But to have the podcast to jump on the moment, usually I'm prepped enough where the moment the game ends, I'm within 5 minutes hitting record. And you're getting kind of like for a big win like Monday night, you're getting kind of the raw emotion of Cedric Mullins
Yeah.
just hitting that 3-run homer. And so
Yeah.
that's been awesome to have that outlet. And it's been awesome that people have taken to it and enjoyed it at least to this point.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things about the podcast is it's like instantaneous. It's like it's not thought like very much thought out. Like you have your notes. It's all like in the moment. Like this is how and when the big games happen, like I was, I don't live in the Baltimore area, so I barely go up to see games. I went to the game for the Anthony Santander walk-off home run, the most boring game I've ever been to, 0-0 forever. And then Anthony Santander walks it off. But I would I just felt that was the first time I've had like a real raw emotion after a game. Um, do you have any like advice for those looking to get into the podcast or media sphere? I mean, you just started it last September, but what is like your advice for those?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, it's different advice for people who are like doing sports media full time, and then people who, like me, did it full time for a while and then kind of flipped into I'm doing something else and this is what I do on the side. For
Yeah,
people like me, when I graduated college and I just jumped into it, like I started doing Locked On Orioles podcast in January of 2020, but it really didn't take off with a listenership until maybe the off season between 2021 and 22. Like, yeah, there were people that listened. Like I had a nice small group of daily listeners, but it wasn't until then where I really got, some numbers and was really starting to feel good about what I was really putting together. So it's certainly a grind. I mean, I wouldn't recommend doing a daily podcast. Like it's a lot of work, right? Like,
yeah,
start with once a week, maybe if you'd like to go and do a podcast. But what I tell people is like, even if there's nobody listening, even if it's just your parents, your siblings, whatever, you send it to a couple of friends, Like get together with somebody and make a podcast, see how it goes, right? Just record yourselves for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, and then go listen back to it and compare it to, podcasts that you like, podcasters you respect, ones that you listen to, and think about, okay, what would they have done here? What should I do different here? And give yourself a lot of space to fail. Like if you do a bunch of podcasts like that early, it gives you space to fail. For me, when I was at the University of Maryland, they put me on the air as in the fall as a freshman on the digital side of the radio station, of the sports radio station. It was just like you have a 1 hour digital show every week with a couple of my roommates. And you know who was listening? My dad, maybe a couple of friends, maybe a couple of other friends from like the university there. That was about it. Like there was no more than probably 8 listeners for every single show that we did. But it gave us a chance to fail. And we were just, messing around sometimes, but other times we really did do research and do some shows. And I look back on those, I did that show basically for all 4 years of my college career. And by the end of it, I was probably putting together something that I may have clipped and sent out to try and help get me a job. I certainly would have sent anything out that I did freshman year. Like, don't want to go
Yeah.
back and listen to any of that. But that gave me a chance to really fail and fail and fail over and over again. And then right now for the podcast, like, again, wouldn't recommend doing a daily podcast, but I believe the episode that will go out Wednesday here, so the one that I'll record tonight after we're talking, will be episode number 842 that I've done of Locked On Orioles. So like it's a lot of repetition and you just get better with the more practice that you have. And the last thing, if if you're trying to start a podcast, start something new, find a niche, find something that not a lot of other people are doing. Like for me, the Locked On Network is a network itself. So the podcast already existed when I took it over, but there's really not other daily Orioles podcast out there.
Yeah.
Like it's almost like I want people to like the show, but if they really want daily Orioles coverage that's specifically Orioles when they turn it on and can listen to it whenever they want, there's not a lot of other places to go. And I think that's really helped me as well. And I think that's another model that can definitely help you have success.
Yeah, that is something that I realized. I was looking for Orioles podcast about a year ago, and I looked up Orioles podcast. The Locked On Orioles podcast is, if not the only, one of the only daily podcasts or even weekly podcasts about the Orioles. So that's one of my favorite things about the podcast. Um, sport journalism is very like, some people like it a lot. Some people absolutely hate how it is nowadays. What is like your favorite part and least favorite part about sports journalism, particularly nowadays, and how it is?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite part is like getting to feel a little more a part of the game than just being a fan, like getting to have a take on something, being able to talk about things, being able to interact, and have a little bit of a platform where want to interact like with fans of the pod or fans of the Orioles on Twitter to, have a little bit of, people aren't nearly trusting what I say as compared to like Nathan Ruiz, who like covers the team as the beat writer for the Baltimore Sun. Like he has way more insight into the team than I do, but I do at least have some sort of platform there that helps those conversations go. That's been great. And it just gives me a better, really what this podcast does, it gives me an excuse to be as locked in as I want to be on the Orioles on a day-to-day basis. Because if I wasn't doing this podcast, I'd probably still be watching almost as much Orioles baseball because I've loved this team my entire life. I love baseball above anything else sports wise. And to see a team that can win 100 games, like I've never really seen that before. But it
Yeah.
gives me an outlet for that too. What I don't like in the business right now, and it's been this way for a while, is the pay is low and the
Yeah.
hours are bad, right? Like the pay is low, especially when you start out. And if you're working in sports, not only do you have to say, oh, I'm available for nights and weekends, your work is nights and weekends. Like that's kind of why I went to the 9 to 5 route, is like I want to have a little more flexibility on the nights and weekends. And
Yeah.
so that part's tough. And the pay is low and it's not a great combination there. But if you really like grind it out, you can get to a point where that pay skyrockets up, you have better standing, and you can really make a good career out of it. But it is certainly tough, not to scare anyone away from it. But there's a reason why right now the sports media thing is my side gig and not my main source of income like it was for a while, because it's tough. It's for some people, it's not for other people. But there's, like everything, there's pros and cons.
Yeah. I have one more question. Um, what, so a lot of people in like the business industry and sports industry, so like say a short-term goal and they have a long-term goal. What is your current short-term goal and what is your long-term goal with the podcast or in your life or regarding anything?
I think short-term goal, I'll just stick it to the podcast. Short-term goal is like cover a playoff run as best I possibly can and grow the audience, bring daily podcasts to people. Like this playoff run, I mean, theoretically, if the Orioles don't play well down the stretch and end up in the wild card round, it could be 2 playoff games and they're done. Like they could be swept out of the wild card round in 2 games and be done. The goal is if that were to somehow happen, still cover it fairly and still be there for people. And on the flip side, if the Orioles make a World Series run, like be there for people every day. Like I haven't really announced this on the podcast, but when the Orioles play weekend postseason games this year, like as I don't record on the weekends. It's Monday through Friday. When the O's play weekend postseason games, most likely there'll be an episode if it's a Friday night postseason game that comes out on Saturday morning. Like I want to be there for people to have something to listen to if it's an exciting postseason game, win or loss, because we haven't had postseason baseball in 7 years for the
Yeah.
Orioles. So I just want to kind of be there throughout this postseason run, really nail it. Because again, I've been hosting the podcast since 2020 and haven't sniffed even thinking about what would I do for a postseason run on
Yeah.
this podcast. Long-term goal is just kind of figure out how long I want to do this, right? Because I found a groove for doing this while I have a 9 to 5 job. And I don't know if I'll be, continuously working 9 to 5 for a long time, but I've already been doing the podcast for, over 3.5 years now. And I can see it going another 3.5 years. But, life changes happen, you move, you hit different points in your life. It was really easy to do it when I first took it over. Now it's not tough, but it gets a little tougher as more things come up in your life. So long-term goals is just kind of like figuring out with every step how Locked On Orioles fits in, because I do love doing it and I know people like listening, which is a really good combination for me to keep going. But it's definitely a goal to just like keep checking in with myself, with the listeners on how it can evolve to keep me doing the podcast.
Yeah. Well, that's all the questions that I have for today. I just want to say I appreciate you coming on and you spending your time.
Yeah, thank you so much, William, for reaching
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. Thank you.